Hello everyone, this is Iran Talk, and in this video I will be discussing the truth about the Mongol invasion of Iran. And now this was probably the most devastating and the most destructive conflict to envelop all of Iran in the entire history of Iranian civilization, and it's probably the reason why Iran never truly recovered in terms of its civilization and cultural output. But anyways, this video will be dealing with the destructive and disastrous Mongol invasion of Iran. Now, Iran, at the time of the Mongol invasion, was at its peak in terms of its cultural output. It was reunited as one entity all the way from Khwarezm to Azerbaijan, and this entity was the Khwarezmian Empire. Now, the Khwarezmian dynasty was a dynasty of Turkic, not Iranic origin, but nonetheless, they managed to unite all of Iran under their rule, and at the time, Khwarezm was largely inhabited by Iranic speakers, not Turkic speakers, but the elite was Turkic, and the Khwarezmian dynasty was largely Persianized in their courtly life. They had managed to reunite all of Iran, and this was the first time in Iran's history for a long time, since the Sassanid Empire, that almost all of Iran was unified under one rule, and this rule was obviously the rule of the Khwarezmian Turks, who migrated into the region a few centuries before, and they managed to monopolize on the region's power vacuum, which was left open after the collapse of the Sassanid dynasty and the emergence of the Arabs. This power vacuum later was reopened with the migration of the Seljuks into the region, and after the collapse of the Seljuks, there was a huge power vacuum, and this power vacuum was ultimately what led to the rise of the Khwarezmian dynasty, and the Khwarezmians managed to unite Iran in a mere 10 to 15 years, and their dynasty at the time of the Mongol invasion was at its peak in terms of culture and military strength. Now, at the time of the rise of the Khwarezmian dynasty, a new dynasty was emerging in the steppes of East Asia, and this dynasty was the Mongolian dynasty, which was led by Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan as he is better known. And this Mongol dynasty was newly established. Genghis Khan, being nominated Khan in 1206, managed to reunite all the Mongol tribes and then invade China. He did not want to invade the Khwarezmian Empire. He did not even probably know about Khwarezm at this time, and his main aim was to conquer all of China and establish a Mongol order over China. He did not really consider invading all of the Khwarezmian Empire, as his invasions of the Khwarezmians would begin afterwards due to some sort of political event which greatly changed and altered the entire history of Iran. Now, this political event took place in the city of Otrar, which was under the governor Inalchuk, and Genghis Khan actually sent emissaries as well as trade emissaries. Most of them were actually trade emissaries, and these individuals came to trade in the Khwarezmian Empire. They wanted to establish contact, and they arrived at Otrar, but the governor of Otrar, having accused them of being spies, had them executed, and this was seen as a very big, it was seen by Genghis Khan as a very humiliating and it broke Genghis Khan's conduct, or Genghis Khan. I'll use Genghis Khan for this video. It broke his international conduct for diplomacy, and he wanted revenge, but he did not initially entitle revenge. He wanted to still establish an agreement with the Khwarezmian Shahdom, and later on he sent 3 diplomats to the Khwarezmian Empire along with some Muslim negotiators, and the attempt was to have there be some sort of agreement between the Khwarezmian Shah to release, not to release rather, but to capture and send the governor of Otrar to Mongolia to be punished. Now, the Shah refused and had the emissaries executed. This was a huge mistake by the Shah, as he did not know what would follow next. What followed next was a destruction unlike any before it, and this destruction would mark the end of the Khwarezmian dynasty and the massacre of millions of Iranics. Now, at this time, the cultural center of Iranian civilization, or Iranic civilization, was Central Asia, and Central Asia specifically being Iranian Central Asia, and this was largely dominated by Iranics. There were very few Turkic groups in the region, and the major cities were Marv, Tus, Nishapur, Buhara, Samarkand, as well as also there was another major city which was Otrar, obviously, but all of these cities, and Herat as well, but all of these cities were located on the Silk Road and had grown prosperous. Their inhabitants were thriving, and poverty was very low in this region. It was very advanced. Most of the Islamic scholars came from this region, the region of Khwarezm and Khorasan, and it was pretty much very highly populated with around 2 million inhabitants. The majority of the Iranic speakers were in urban settlements, and the rural areas were dominated by the Turks who had recently arrived, but there was very little intermingling between the Turks and the native Iranic speakers. And after this incident between Chinggis Khan or Genghis Khan's emissaries and the Khwarezmian Shah, the population would drastically be reduced, and Genghis rather kicked off his invasion of Khwarezmia by first besieging the city of Otrar, which was an oasis town located in Khwarezm. Now, during the invasion, the Shah's armies were concentrated in the cities, and the majority of the cities were garrison cities, and very little of the Shah's armies were outside the cities. The Shah's armies believed that the high walls of the cities would protect them, but what they did not count on was the recently introduced gunpowder weapons, which had made their way into the Mongol army by way of China, and the Mongols were well prepared to besiege enemy territories wherever they went, and this was especially true of Khwarezmia. They first invaded and sacked the city of Otrar, and after that they moved on, sacking Nishapur and Samarkand, Buhara. They actually ended up, there were a few cities they spared in Central Asia, such as Buhara, but after rebellions they managed to sack them, and these rebellions were major, but they did result in the sack of these cities and the formation of skulls outside of cities. And the most famous sack in Central Asia was at Merv, where Juwayni recorded, the Persian historian rather, Juwayni recorded that there were around 1.7 million dead individuals in that city. The entire civilian population was massacred, and it is not known how many truly perished. The estimate is around 800,000, but Marv was the major center of intellect in Central Asia, in Iranian Central Asia, and it was destroyed. After this sack of Merv, they proceeded to sack Tus and Nishapur. At Nishapur, Attar, the famous poet, was killed, and Herat was also sacked. This sack led to the mass extermination of the native Iranians. The total death toll is hard to count, but it is believed that at least 1.7 to 2.5 million Iranians perished in this conflict, and it was a very deadly conflict. Around 25% of the Khwarezmian Empire's population perished. Around 90% of the population of Iranian Central Asia perished. Nearly the entire Iranic-speaking population and the Iranian population was killed, and this destruction was brought upon the Central Asian Iranian cities because of the mistakes of the Khwarezmian Shah Mohammed II, as well as the mistakes of Inalchuk, who was the governor of Otrar, who had initially killed the emissaries that Chinggis Khan had sent. Now, this was a major turning point in the history of Iranian Central Asia, as it led to the migration of Turks into the abandoned urban dwellings, and they established themselves there, and it eventually led to the decline of the native Iranian-speaking population in Central Asia, which was already declining because of the Turkish presence, but nonetheless dominated the urban settlements. But this was unfortunate, very, very unfortunate, and the amounts of deaths here were quite staggering and significant. After this, the Mongols did eventually they did annex much of eastern Khwarezmia, which included parts of Iranian Central Asia and eastern Iran, but they did not progress to Iran until the later era. And during their ravaging of Iran, while later era I mean the era after the death of Genghis Khan, but they later ravaged much of Iran. They wiped out most of the Shashin or Ismaili strongholds which were there, and they also ravaged Ray and its countryside. Ray was also a major Iranian settlement, and the Mongol invasion of Ray also led to a mass amount of death in the city, but they did not attack most of the Iranian heartland. They spared Isfahan and southern Iran, as most of those Iranian cities surrendered without any question, and the Mongols proceeded then to move into Azerbaijan and raid into Georgia and that's essentially what ended the Mongol invasion of Iran temporarily, as it would later be revived under the Timurids, and they did bring more devastation to central Iran than the Mongols did. But nonetheless, the Mongol devastation of Iranian Central Asia was significant, and it led to mass death, mass starvation, and mass murder at the hands by the Mongols rather, and the mass murder of the Iranic population did alter the demographic makeup of Central Asia for the many centuries to come. Furthermore, this conflict was more devastating for Iran than the Arab invasions. The Arab invasions, while being devastating on a religious and cultural sense, really did not alter the intellectual capabilities of Iranians and the intellectual output of the Iranian people. But nonetheless, the Mongol invasions altered dramatically the intellectual and cultural output of the Iranian peoples. And the reason for this is the mass extermination of the highly cultured, highly advanced, and highly civilized urban populations. These urban populations were the ones which were highly dominated by a major, some sort of urban elite, which was largely Turkic at around the time of the Mongol invasion. But nonetheless, this urban elite was always a patron of the arts. Ever since the days of the Safavids in Khwarezm, it was a region of some sort of cultural synthesis and cultural flowering. The Safavids obviously being one of the longest reigning dynasties in Central Asia, which survived the Arab invasion of Iran. Furthermore, intellect after this intellectual output was greatly reduced, and many Iranians did die at the hands of the Mongol invaders. And this is the most important thing to take into account here, as if this invasion did not happen, Iran would still be a very advanced and unified entity. But the Mongol invasion of Iran definitely put Iran back a few hundred years, if not an entire 1,000 years. It was very devastating for Iran, and it took Iran until the 15th or 16th rather 16th century to recover from this, as no native dynasty was managed to arise in the aftermath of this, and Iran was mainly dominated by Turkoman and Mongol rulers until the rise of the Safavids in the 16th century. But that's essentially it for this video. Thanks for watching, and this video just covered the destructive Mongol invasion of Iran, and my next video will take a look at the exploits of Darius the Great, who was a major Achaemenid Shahanshah. Thanks for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe, and please do get the word out about this channel to your friends and family.